They say the person who can hurt you the most is the one you love the most. But what happens when that person destroys you for someone who was supposed to be your friend? My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my perfect relationship and my closest friendship both exploded in the same moment, and how I made sure they both paid the ultimate price. 8 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 25, working as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup, and I was head over heels in love with my boyfriend, Jake. We'd been together for 2 years, living in a beautiful apartment we'd picked out together, talking about engagement rings and future plans. Jake was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. He was charming, ambitious, and incredibly supportive of my career goals. He'd drive me to work when my car was in the shop, bring me coffee during long nights at the office, and listen patiently when I vented about difficult clients. More importantly, he got along perfectly with my best friend, Melissa. The three of us would hang out constantly: movie nights at our place, weekend trips to the beach, double dates when Melissa was seeing someone. I loved that my boyfriend and my best friend were close. It felt like proof that I'd chosen well, that the most important people in my life could all be part of the same happy circle. Melissa had been my best friend since college. We'd been roommates for 3 years, bridesmaids in each other's sisters' weddings, and partners in crime through every major life event. She was the person I called when I got promoted. She was the shoulder I cried on when my grandmother passed away. She was the first person I told when Jake said he loved me. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way Melissa's eyes would light up when Jake walked into a room, how she always found excuses to touch his arm when she laughed at his jokes, the fact that she started dressing differently when she knew Jake would be around, more makeup, tighter clothes, that perfume she only wore on special occasions. But I trusted them both completely. Jake was my future husband. Melissa was my soul sister. The idea that they could betray me never even crossed my mind. I should have known something was wrong when they started having private conversations about my surprise birthday party, or when Jake began working late more often, claiming his startup was in crunch mode for a major product launch, or when Melissa canceled 3 girls' nights in a row, saying she was too tired or had to help her mom with something. Instead, I just felt grateful that the 2 most important people in my life cared enough about me to plan something special. I even felt guilty for being suspicious when I caught them whispering and immediately stopping when I walked into the room. God, I was so naive. The truth is, they'd been planning something special, just not what I thought. They'd been planning how to destroy my life, while making it look like an accident. They'd been planning how to steal my happiness while convincing themselves they were the victims of some grand, irresistible love story. They had no idea that their betrayal was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. It was a Friday evening in September when my world came crashing down. Jake had told me he was working late again, and Melissa had begged off our usual Friday night dinner, claiming she had a headache and just wanted to stay home and rest. I was feeling a little sorry for myself, sitting alone in our apartment with takeout Chinese food, when I realized I'd left my laptop charger at the office. Since Jake's company was only 2 blocks from mine, I decided to stop by his building and see if he wanted to grab a quick dinner together. The security guard knew me from previous visits and let me up to Jake's floor. As I walked toward his office, I could hear voices coming from the conference room. One of them was definitely Jake's. The other sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I pushed open the conference room door, expecting to find Jake in a late-night strategy session with his coworkers. Instead, I found my boyfriend of 2 years kissing my best friend of 6 years. It wasn't a quick peck. It wasn't an accident. It was a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of intimacy, of a relationship that had clearly been going on for much longer than a single moment of weakness. I stood there frozen, my laptop charger dropping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The sound broke them apart, and they turned to look at me with expressions I'll never forget. Jake looked panicked, like a child caught stealing candy. But Melissa looked defiant, almost relieved. "Rachel," Jake started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "How long?" I asked quietly. They looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation, before Melissa lifted her chin and said, 3 months. 3 months. They'd been carrying on behind my back for 3 months while I planned our future and treasured our friendship. 3 months of lies, of secret meetings, of stolen moments while I worked late and trusted them both completely. "We didn't plan for this to happen," Jake said, taking a step toward me. "It just developed naturally." "Naturally," I repeated, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "So this is natural. Sneaking around behind my back for 3 months is natural." "Rachel, please," Melissa said, and her voice actually sounded annoyed. "You have to understand. We tried to fight it, but you can't control who you fall in love with." Fall in love with. She said it like it was some beautiful, tragic romance instead of a betrayal that had destroyed everything I cared about. "So, what happens now?" I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. Jake and Melissa exchanged another look, and I realized they'd already discussed this. They'd already planned out how this conversation would go, how they'd handle the aftermath of destroying my life. "I think it's best if I move out," Jake said carefully. "Give you some space to process this, and maybe Melissa and I can give you some time before we—" "Before you what?" I interrupted. "Before you move in together? Before you get engaged? Before you start the life you've been planning while lying to my face for 3 months?" Neither of them answered, but their silence told me everything I needed to know. That's when something inside me shifted. The shock was still there, burning in my chest like acid. The hurt was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe. But underneath it all, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating and absolutely furious. I looked at both of them standing there, already reaching for each other's hands like I was the obstacle they'd finally overcome. And I realized they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. "You're right," I said finally. "Jake should move out. Tonight." They both looked relieved, like I was taking this better than expected. What they didn't know was that I'd just made a decision. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to beg or plead or ask them to choose me. And I certainly wasn't going to make this easy for them. They wanted to destroy my life for their love story? Fine. But they were about to learn that some love stories come with a very high price. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't bear the thought of watching Jake pack his things, of listening to his explanations and apologies and justifications. Instead, I checked into a hotel and spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I'd missed all the signs. But by morning, my shock had transformed into something much more dangerous: curiosity. See, 3 months is a long time to carry on a secret affair, long enough to leave traces, long enough to make mistakes. And if I knew anything about Jake and Melissa, it was that they weren't nearly as clever as they thought they were. I started with our shared Google Photos account. Jake and I had been sharing photos for over a year, and while I couldn't see his private albums, I could see every photo he'd ever shared with me. I scrolled back through the past 3 months looking for inconsistencies. There it was. A photo he'd sent me from what he claimed was a work conference in Portland 2 months ago. The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m., and he was holding a beer with the city skyline in the background. But when I reverse searched the image, I found the exact same skyline view from a rooftop bar in Seattle, the city where Melissa had told me she was visiting her cousin that same weekend. They'd been on a romantic getaway together while lying to me about their locations. Next, I checked our shared credit card statements. Jake and I had a joint account we used for shared expenses, but we each had our own personal cards for individual purchases. What I found made my stomach turn. Dinner for 2 at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges from weekends when he'd told me he was visiting his college roommate. Jewelry purchases from stores I didn't recognize. Even lingerie from a boutique that definitely wasn't buying gifts for me. But the most damning evidence was in our phone records. Jake and I were on a family plan, so I could see call and text logs for both our numbers. Starting 3 months ago, there was a sudden spike in communication between Jake and Melissa. Long phone calls that happened while I was at work, text message chains that went on for hours during times when they were both supposedly doing other things. The pattern was clear and undeniable. This hadn't been a sudden moment of weakness or a gradual emotional affair that spiraled out of control. This had been a deliberate, calculated relationship that they'd hidden from me with military precision. But as I dug deeper, I found something even more interesting, something that changed everything about how I was going to handle this situation. Melissa had been posting about her love life on social media, but not in the way you'd expect. She'd been documenting her secret romance with carefully crafted posts designed to look innocent to most people, but clearly tell the story to anyone who was paying attention. Photos of fancy dinners with captions like, "Sometimes you find magic in unexpected places." Pictures of flowers with messages about when someone sees the real you. Even a shot of 2 coffee cups on a table with the caption, "Perfect mornings start with the perfect company." But here's what was really interesting. The locations and timing of these posts perfectly matched Jake's credit card charges and phone records. Melissa hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been documenting it online like it was some beautiful love story she wanted the world to eventually discover. She was proud of stealing my boyfriend. She thought their betrayal was romantic. That's when I realized this wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about making sure everyone knew exactly who Jake and Melissa really were. They wanted to be seen as star-crossed lovers who couldn't help themselves? Fine. But the world was also going to see them as liars, cheaters, and people who destroyed someone, who loved them both. I spent the next week building the most comprehensive case of infidelity documentation anyone had ever assembled. Screenshots of everything, timeline analysis, cross-referenced evidence that proved beyond any doubt that they'd been planning this betrayal for months. But I also discovered something else, something that would make my revenge even sweeter. Jake's startup was in the middle of securing major funding from a group of investors who specifically valued integrity and character in the companies they supported. Melissa worked for a nonprofit organization whose board had strict policies about employees who engaged in behavior that could damage the organization's reputation. Their love story wasn't just going to cost them their relationship with me, it was going to cost them everything they'd worked for. And I was going to make sure it happened in the most public, humiliating way possible. The beautiful thing about revenge is that sometimes you don't have to destroy people yourself. Sometimes you just have to create the conditions for them to destroy themselves. And Jake and Melissa were about to do exactly that. 2 weeks after discovering their affair, I did something that surprised everyone. I agreed to meet them for coffee to talk things through. "I've had time to think," I told them as we sat in the same cafe where Melissa and I used to meet for our weekly friend dates. "And I want to understand what happened. I want to hear your side of the story." Jake looked relieved. Melissa looked suspicious, but she also looked eager to tell her version of events. "We never meant to hurt you," Jake started. "But Rachel, we fell in love. Really, truly in love. And we fought it for as long as we could. But eventually, we had to be honest about our feelings." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Melissa added, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I didn't pull away. "You're my best friend, and the last thing I ever wanted was to cause you pain." But I couldn't ignore what I felt for Jake. I listened to their story with fascination. According to them, they were the victims of an inconvenient but undeniable love that had swept them away despite their best efforts to resist it. They talked about the emotional torture of hiding their feelings, the impossible situation they'd been placed in, the difficult decision to choose love over loyalty. Not once did they acknowledge that they could have come to me honestly. Not once did they take responsibility for the 3 months of lies and deception. In their narrative, they were tragic heroes who'd been forced into an impossible situation by forces beyond their control. I'm glad you told me your side, I said finally. It helps me understand what happened, and honestly, seeing you together now, I can see how much you love each other. They both looked so relieved that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Does this mean you can forgive us? Melissa asked hopefully. I think so, I said. I mean, it's going to take time and things will obviously be different, but I don't want to lose both of you from my life forever. You mean too much to me. What I didn't tell them was that I'd recorded our entire conversation. What I also didn't tell them was that their confession of a 3-month affair contradicted the story they'd been telling everyone else. See, while I'd been investigating their relationship, I'd also been talking to mutual friends, family members, and coworkers. Jake had been telling people that his relationship with me had been falling apart for months, and that he and Melissa had only gotten together after we'd basically broken up. Melissa had been telling people that she'd tried to help us work things out, but that Jake and I were just incompatible. But in our coffee conversation, they'd admitted to a passionate love affair that started while Jake and I were still very much together, planning our future and talking about marriage. Their lies were about to catch up with them in spectacular fashion. That evening, I sent carefully crafted messages to key people in both their lives. Not angry rants or emotional accusations, but thoughtful, factual summaries of what I'd discovered. To Jake's business partner and lead investor, I thought you should know that Jake has been misrepresenting his personal situation during your funding discussions. He's been telling you that his relationship with me ended months ago due to mutual incompatibility, but the truth is that he's been having a secret affair with my best friend for the past 3 months. I have documentation if you need it, but I thought his integrity and honesty were important factors in your investment decision. To Melissa's supervisor at the nonprofit, I wanted to make you aware of a situation that might affect Melissa's position. She's been documenting an affair with my boyfriend on social media while lying to friends and family about the circumstances. Given your organization's commitment to transparency and ethical behavior, I thought you should know about the pattern of deception. To our mutual friend group, I didn't send accusatory messages. Instead, I simply shared the timeline of evidence I'd gathered, along with screenshots of their contradictory stories. I let the facts speak for themselves, but the most devastating message went to Jake's ex-girlfriend from college, who had reached out to me months earlier, warning me about Jake's pattern of cheating. I sent her everything I'd found, along with a simple note. You tried to warn me. I should have listened. She forwarded my evidence to 3 other women Jake had apparently cheated on, and suddenly there was a pattern of behavior that went back years. Within 48 hours, Jake and Melissa's carefully crafted narrative had completely fallen apart. Everyone could see exactly who they really were: serial cheaters and manipulative liars who would say anything to justify their betrayal. But I wasn't done yet, because the best part of my plan was still to come. The dominoes started falling on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I discovered Jake and Melissa's affair. Jake called me at 7:30 a.m., completely panicked. "Rachel, what did you do? The investors are pulling out. They said they can't work with someone who lacks fundamental integrity and honesty. My business partner wants to buy me out of the company." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly. "What happened?" "You know what happened," Jake shouted. "You sent them information about us, about Melissa and me. You destroyed my career over a relationship issue." "I sent them facts," I corrected. "The fact that you've been lying to them about your personal situation for months. The fact that you built your funding pitch around being a stable, trustworthy person while secretly carrying on an affair. They made their own decision about whether someone who lies that extensively can be trusted with their money." Jake tried to argue, but we both knew I was right. His startup's entire brand had been built around authenticity and transparency. The investors weren't just funding a company, they were funding Jake personally. Learning that he'd been living a double life for months had destroyed their confidence in his character. Meanwhile, Melissa was dealing with her own crisis. Her nonprofit's board had called an emergency meeting to discuss whether her behavior was compatible with their mission of supporting families and building trust in communities. Several major donors had specifically mentioned that they couldn't continue supporting an organization that employed someone who specialized in destroying families. But the real devastation was happening in their social circle. Our mutual friends had seen all the evidence, and they were horrified, not just by the affair itself, but by the months of elaborate lies Jake and Melissa had told to cover it up. "I can't believe they looked me in the eye and lied for 3 months," our friend Sarah told me. "Melissa helped me plan your birthday party while she was sleeping with your boyfriend. That's not just cheating, that's sociopathic." The story spread quickly through our extended social network. College friends, work colleagues, even family members began distancing themselves from Jake and Melissa. Their great love story was being seen for what it really was, a selfish betrayal that had destroyed multiple relationships and hurt everyone who cared about them. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Jake's ex-girlfriend from college posted a detailed Facebook thread about his pattern of cheating, using my evidence as proof that he'd never changed. The post went viral in our college alumni network, with dozens of people sharing their own stories about Jake's dishonesty and manipulation. Suddenly, everyone could see that what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. Jake was a serial cheater who used the same tactics repeatedly, love-bombing his targets, isolating them from potential sources of support, and then gaslighting them when they discovered his betrayals. Melissa's reputation didn't fare any better. Her social media documentation of the affair, which she'd thought was romantic and poetic, was being shared as an example of how people could be proud of destroying others. The nonprofit world is small, and word spread quickly that she was someone who couldn't be trusted with sensitive information or ethical responsibilities. 3 months later, Jake's startup had completely collapsed. His business partner bought him out for a fraction of what his shares had been worth, and Jake was forced to take an entry-level position at a much larger company. The tech startup scene is built on reputation and connections, and Jake's reputation was permanently damaged. Melissa lost her job at the nonprofit and struggled to find work in her field. Every potential employer who Googled her name found the story of how she'd systematically betrayed her best friend while documenting the affair on social media. Organizations that valued integrity and loyalty weren't interested in hiring someone with that kind of track record. But the most important consequence was that their relationship didn't survive either. Turns out, building a relationship on lies, betrayal, and selfishness doesn't create a strong foundation for lasting love. When the excitement of sneaking around was gone, when they faced real consequences for their choices, when they realized that everyone they knew had lost respect for them, they started turning on each other. Melissa blamed Jake for ruining her career by being careless with evidence. Jake blamed Melissa for posting everything online and making their affair easy to document. Within 6 months of destroying my life for their great love, they destroyed each other too. A year later, my life looked completely different, and it was better in every way imaginable. I'd gotten promoted at work partly because my focus and productivity had dramatically improved once I wasn't spending energy on a relationship with someone who was lying to me every day. I'd moved to a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in the part of town I'd always wanted to live in, but Jake had said was too expensive and not practical for couples. I'd also done something I'd been putting off for years. I'd started taking photography classes. Jake had always dismissed my artistic interests as hobbies that wouldn't pay the bills, but without his constant negativity, I discovered that I actually had real talent. I was even selling some of my work at local galleries. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts again. The experience with Jake and Melissa had taught me that my gut feelings were usually right, and that people who truly care about you don't make you feel crazy for having concerns. But the most healing moment came 8 months after everything fell apart. I was having coffee with a new friend I'd met in photography class when I saw Melissa across the street, looking tired and defeated. She saw me through the window and, after hesitating for a long moment, came inside. "Rachel," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at her, remembering the girl who used to be my best friend, who I'd trusted with my deepest secrets and biggest dreams. "What did you want to say, Melissa?" "I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not for getting caught, but for what I did. For betraying you. For lying to you every day for 3 months while pretending to be your friend. For taking something that belonged to you and convincing myself I deserved it." She looked genuinely remorseful, but I felt surprisingly little. No anger, no satisfaction, no desire to hurt her further. Just a kind of sad emptiness where my love for her used to be. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But Melissa, what you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. Every day for 3 months, you chose to betray me. Every conversation where you listened to me talk about my future with Jake, every time you helped me plan something special for him, every lie you told about where you were or what you were doing, those were all choices." "I know," she said, tears starting to fall. "I know, and I have to live with that. But Rachel, we were best friends for 6 years. Can we ever fix this?" I thought about it for a moment, really considering her question. "Maybe someday we can have some kind of relationship again, but it will never be what it was. You broke something that can't be repaired, Melissa. And the person you became, the person who could do what you did while looking me in the eye every day, I don't think I want that person in my life." She nodded, still crying, and walked away. I went back to my coffee and my friend, and I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was free. The truth is, Jake and Melissa's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been the best thing that ever happened to me. It had freed me from a relationship with someone who didn't value honesty or loyalty. It had shown me who my real friends were. It had taught me to trust myself and stand up for what I deserved. Most importantly, it had taught me that justice isn't about getting revenge. Justice is about making sure that people face the natural consequences of their choices. Jake lost his business because he built it on lies about his character. Melissa lost her job because she documented her betrayal of someone who trusted her. They lost their friend group because they'd been lying to everyone for months. They lost each other because relationships built on deception don't last. I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure everyone could see them clearly. People often ask me if I regret how I handled the situation, if I think I went too far, if I feel guilty about the consequences they faced. The truth is, I don't think of it as revenge at all. I think of it as accountability. In a world where cheaters often get forgiveness they don't deserve, where manipulators rarely face real consequences, where people can lie and betray and hurt others without losing anything important, I made sure that wasn't the case here. Jake and Melissa made choices. They chose to lie, to deceive, to betray someone who loved them both unconditionally. They chose to build their happiness on my pain. They chose to risk everything, their careers, their friendships, their integrity, for a secret affair. I simply made sure those choices had real consequences. And here's what I learned from the experience. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. When someone chooses to betray your trust, don't waste time trying to understand why. Focus on protecting yourself and making sure they can't do it again. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a life so good that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. It's becoming so strong, so confident, so clear about what you deserve that people like Jake and Melissa can never fool you again. Today, I'm in a relationship with someone who values honesty above comfort, who celebrates my successes instead of diminishing them, who would never dream of making me doubt my own instincts. I have friendships based on genuine loyalty instead of convenient lies. And most importantly, I have the knowledge that when someone tried to destroy my life, I didn't just survive. I made sure justice was served, because some betrayals deserve consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what people need to learn who they really are.